I'd like to welcome you to the San Diego Air and Space Museum Speaker Series, where several of our volunteers at the museum are going to talk about some of their favorite aircraft and other artifacts that we have at the museum. My name is Dudley Oatman. I'm a retired Army Master Aviator, and I currently work at the San Diego Air and Space Museum as a docent. One of my favorite artifacts at the museum is our Bell AH-1 Cobra. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I'd also throw in a little bit about Army aviation, about the Cobra in Vietnam. Now, I say this is my favorite aircraft at the museum for two reasons. The first reason is that the Cobra is the world's first purpose-built attack helicopter. What do I mean by that is that it does not carry people, it does not carry cargo, it does one thing: it attacks. The second reason I like the Cobra is because I spent 2 tours in Vietnam flying the Cobra, plus 2 other tours stateside flying the Cobra also. So I became rather attached to the old lady. My 46 years of aviation flying started when I drove through the front gate of the primary helicopter center at Fort Walter, Texas, back in March of 1967. The first month of flight school was called pre-flight, and that's because, as you might imagine, we did not fly. We spent our time in the classrooms, morning and afternoon. In the classrooms, we learned about leadership, teamwork, customs of the service, and essentially how to become an officer. When we were not in the classrooms, we were subjected to a fair amount of discipline and harassment. And I often have people ask me, well, why did they have so much discipline and harassment in flight school? And the discipline part was because the government was spending about $200,000 back in 1967 to teach us how to fly helicopters, and they wanted to make sure that we had the proper motivation to get through all of the training. The harassment side of the house, being yelled at and being subjected to unreasonable physical training and other things. What was all that about? And it's simply this, that if you couldn't take a little bit of people yelling at you and a lot of chaos, confusion, and if you couldn't keep a clear head and a good situational awareness of what's going on about you, then you probably had no business being in command of an aircraft in combat. So if we survived the pre-flight phase, we began our flight training. And this was my class photo. We had 50 walks, and a walk is a warrant officer candidate. And we had, like I said, 50 walks per flight, and we had 8 flights, so a total of about 400 walks per class. And our primary flight training was a total of about 4 months. Half of our class flew the AH-23 Raven helicopter, and I was in that half of the class. Very good aircraft, a great trainer, a little slow on the controls, but otherwise very stable. And I remember the first time my son saw this picture, he looked up at me with big eyes, and he says, "Dad, you were really brave." And I was a little taken back by the comment because I thought I was cool, not brave. Anyway, first time I saw the main heliport at Fort Walters, I was somewhat impressed. This is only the center section of that airport. Total, there was about 200 aircraft. The other half of our class flew the TH-55 flight trainer. They kept all their aircraft at Dempsey Army Airfield. So we had about a total of 400 aircraft total for each class. What did we do when we were flight training? Well, we learned how to hover, which is more difficult than it sounds. And we would go out from Fort Walters Heliport, and we would go to stage fields. This is a picture of one here. And we would hover down to the takeoff end. We would take off, fly a traffic pattern crosswind, and then we'd fly downwind, and then we'd turn base leg, and then we'd come back in and land, and then hover down to the takeoff end again and do it all over. In addition, we learned about auto rotation, how to navigate, and learned all about the emergencies. And there were a whole lot of other things, but I'm just hitting the main points right now. A couple of the areas that we found the most fun, or at least I did, And that is confined area landings. Helicopters are very good for confined areas. That's what they were built for. Don't need a runway or anything. You can just land any place you have enough room for your rotor blades. This is a picture of a OH-23 in a confined area. And it's kind of hard to see, but there are trees all the way around that confined area. So we would come in and land, and then we would take off again and go do it multiple times. We also did pinnacle landings, which were an experience all in themselves, and they were a great deal of fun and quite a challenge. So in our classrooms this time, though, we were learning about aircraft systems, a lot about aerodynamics, weather, map reading, and there were a whole laundry list of topics that we eventually became proficient at. A couple of my significant memories from Fort Walters was forced landings or engine failures. When an aircraft is flying along, the engine is providing power up through a main shaft, and it turns the rotor blades. As it turns the rotor blades, they have a positive pitch on them, which causes the air above the rotor blades to be sucked down below and pushed out with quite a force, about 100 miles an hour wind underneath the helicopter. And that provides the lift so that the aircraft can take off and land and fly. When the engine quits, there's a disconnect right up in here. The engine will stop, but the main rotor blades will continue to turn. And as gravity pulls the aircraft down through the air going up through the rotor blades continues to cause them to turn. And you can use the inertia in the rotor blades to safely sit down and gently land the aircraft with no damage whatsoever. The only caveat there was that you only get one shot at it. Once you've used up that inertia, there's no getting it back. So we practice auto rotations a lot. So the one thing that I remember is that from the very first day we started flying, the instructors would call out, okay, this is simulated engine failure, and then we had to go through our memory items to respond to the emergency, usually during a very busy portion of the flight. One day after I had been cleared for solo flight, and I was like this aircraft shows, by myself, I just landed in a confined area. I took off, I climbed up to my 1,500 feet, and then I suddenly heard a bang and a shudder from the aircraft, and the engine failed. It just completely stopped. I had a couple seconds of mind fog as the situation soaked in to my mind, and then I heard a call on the radio that said, Roger, your mayday, we'll call recovery. And that kind of snapped me out of my daze. And I thought, oh my God, I've had an engine failure. The first, okay, I've got to put the collective all the way down. Well, it already was. And I have to roll the throttle off, and well, that was already turned off too. The moral of the story is that without even thinking about it, I had completed all of the emergency actions for this emergency, and I have no memory at all of doing any of them. Our training was so good and so efficient that I was able to obviously encounter an emergency and respond to it just automatically. And this was a big learning point for me, because I knew then that everything that our instructors were trying to teach us had a very definite purpose down the road. Another thing that I remember is that in the latter part of primary at Fort Walters, our instructors for that phase were all Army veterans. They had all been to Vietnam. And we'd be flying along and usually busy doing something, navigating or starting an approach or something like this. And the instructor would reach down and he would slap on the side of the aircraft, and we just absolutely jumped. And the first time that happened to me, if I hadn't had my seatbelt and shoulder harness secured, I probably would have jumped right out of the aircraft. But then the instructor would say, fly the aircraft, fly the aircraft. And he was absolutely right. I was so startled by that I completely forgot what I was doing. And when the instructor started doing this, my classmates really caused a ruckus and said, oh man, this is definitely outside the syllabus. I told my classmates my story about the forced landing and how well I handled that without even having to think about it. So it gave everybody a little bit different perspective. And I can tell you this, the first time I was in Vietnam and my aircraft was hit by ground fire, I knew exactly what it was, and I knew exactly what to do, fly the aircraft. So thank you to all those instructors in flight school. Okay, after Fort Walters, we took off and headed to Fort Rucker for our advanced flight training, which was another 4 months. And this time we were flying probably the most iconic helicopter in the world, the AH-1 Huey helicopter built by Bell Helicopters. It is turbine powered, a very great aircraft to fly. It just does everything very, very well. The first 2 weeks was instrument flight training. So what this means is, and these are your primary flight instruments in an aircraft, and they allow you to control the aircraft, keep right side up, and fly around in the clouds where you can see neither sky nor ground or anything in between. The first part of our instrument flight training we did in what's called a link trainer. And the link trainer, when you close this door and you pull the hood down on top, you cannot see outside anywhere. So you had these flight instruments to navigate and control your aircraft with. And of course, the link trainer would pitch up, pitch down, turn left, turn right, roll left, roll right, just like an aircraft would. And our instructors would have a movie map display down here so they could critique us and demonstrate those things that we needed to learn. In an aircraft, we were flying the TH-13 instrument trainer, especially equipped with all the flight instruments, and we wore a hood over the top of our eyes attached to our helmet so that we could only see the instrument. You really had to focus on your instruments. And one of the big problems with instrument flying, and this is probably where we lost most of our candidates out of flight school, is the human inner ear is so designed to give us a sense of acceleration and movement. You use those all the time. And now we had to not pay attention to those things that we've been using all of our lives to walk and maintain our balance. And we had to disregard those and only trust our instruments. Okay, so anyway, continuing on with Fort Rucker, we had flown small formations at Fort Walters, but now we're flying large formations and performing combat assaults. If the lead ship makes a very fast move, the ship behind him has to move even faster and farther, and the ship behind him, and it just compounds the situation. So it was really a skill that we learned on how to fly these large formations and be able to land as a formation and take off as a formation. We also learned about sling loads, and that's where a Huey can attach a very strong nylon strap to its cargo hook, and it can pick up the smaller aircraft. In this case, this was a Loach, and this picture was actually taken in Vinh Long, and I was bringing one of our shot down Loaches back into Vinh Long so we could fix it and repair it. And obviously, we had also had the crew on board. Another part of flight school was the gunnery training. Now, this is another sort of iconic picture because it shows, at the time, the best gunships we had. This happens to be a B model. We also had the C models, which look almost identical. And they built mounts for it, and you could put 2 machine guns, M60 machine guns outside, and a 7-shot rocket pod. And the same on the other side. The crew chief and the door gunner would have handheld M60 machine guns. And it did a pretty decent job. Its 2 biggest limitations were it was the same speed as the aircraft that were carrying the troops, so we could not sprint ahead and prepare the landing zone by keeping Charlie's head down at the landing zone. And when I say Charlie, I'm talking about either Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese regulars. We called all the aggressors Charlie. And the other thing was that the Huey made a pretty good target. It was big, and not being fast was not to its advantage, but it was the best we had, and it did a pretty good job. Another tactic that we learned at Fort Rucker, and this is our B model gunship again, is flying low level. Low level is exhilarating beyond my capability to describe it, and it's very, very fun for us newbie pilots to learn how to do it. And we always thought it was kind of like teaching a bear how to poop in the woods. This is something we didn't have to do. This is something we wanted to do. But then, of course, they had to make it complex, as the Army always does, and we had to do low-level navigation. And this may sound like so what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is your landmarks that you normally see at altitude are not visible until you're right up on top of them. So you've got to be really good at map reading for low-level navigation. But we learned how to do that too. Finally, we graduated from flight school. We graduated 305 pilots out of the 400 that started. And the day before actual graduation, we had what we call a graduation flyby. And this is where all the warrant officer candidates would climb aboard Hueys, and we would fly this big, long formation over the top of Fort Rucker. It was quite an event. It was a tradition. They did it once a month. And the reason I have this picture or this arrow pointing at that first aircraft, I was fortunate enough to graduate #1 in flight training. They graded us in flying ability, academics, and also discipline. And I ended up #1 in the flying, so I was really satisfied with that. Anyway, this picture was taken by one of my roommates, another 100 aircraft back there behind him. So then the next day, we're standing in the big auditorium. We are all appointed warrant officers, and then we are issued our wings. And this is my lovely wife, Kathy, pinning my wings onto my uniform coat. Big day for both of us. After Fort Rucker, we were off to Hunter Army Airfield. And the reason was because I had graduated well in flight training, I was given an option of flying an additional aircraft besides just the Huey before I went to Vietnam. This is the original AH-1 G model Cobra. It is, as I mentioned earlier, it was designed as an attack helicopter. So it attacks and defends, has a crew of 2, relatively fast, 190 knot top speed versus the 120 knot top speed of the Huey and the Loach. The Cobras are very maneuverable and they're very stable, which is important for a gun platform. And they were armed with machine guns and rockets, and later on with cannons and missiles. And its primary purpose is to attack the enemy to defend our fighting soldiers on the ground. And that is what it did very, very well. The helicopter made a number of public relations videos. This is one of them, and I've cut it down to about 2 minutes. So let's just take a look at some excerpts from that Bell video.
This is the Huey Cobra, the world's first attack helicopter. It provides the ground soldier with the finest direct fire support any Army has ever known. The Cobra's mission effectiveness is the product of its maneuverability, speed, and most important, its stability as a weapons platform. Stability is the key to accuracy in ordnance delivery. The Huey Cobra has been designed to accept the weapons of today and tomorrow. The XM-28 turret subsystem mounts 2 7.62mm miniguns with 4,000 rounds per gun. Turrets are controlled by a flexible pantograph gun sight with built-in lead compensation. The 2.75-inch spin-stabilized folding fin aerial rockets can be carried in the 7-tube XM-157 pods or in the 19-tube XM-159 pods on all 4 wing pylons for a maximum ordnance load of 76 rockets. The rockets are fired in pairs at a rate of 6 pairs per second and have an accuracy of 26 mils circular error probable. 20mm cannon kit provides the Huey Cobra with a weapon system capable of effectively engaging point targets at 2,500 meters and area targets at 3,500 meters. Test data from these firings will be used in the design and construction of a fully operational 20 or 30mm turret subsystem. This then is the Huey Cobra, meeting the challenge of today and prepared for the challenge of tomorrow.
Okay, that was a pretty nice video demonstrating basically what a Huey Cobra is all about. So as I mentioned earlier, the Huey gunships were fairly good, but they were not good enough. So in 1965, the Army issued a contract bid for what was called an Advanced Aerial Fire Support System, an AFIS. They had 7 different aircraft manufacturers submitted bids for this contract bid. Lockheed won with their AH-56 Cheyenne. And this was quite a spectacular aircraft, probably 15 years ahead of its time. But they did have some aerodynamic stability issues with the airframe. And they were trying to work those out, but they told the Army that it was going to take them 3 to 5 years to get into production for the Cheyenne. So back at Bell Helicopter, Bell's submission for the bid was not very good. The biggest issue was it had a piston engine. So it was way underpowered. It was not very big. It was not very fast, but it did have a couple of nice attributes. One of them was the turret up in the front, which can fire left, right, up and down, controlled by the gunner in the front. They had tandem seating of the pilot and the gunner, which meant the aircraft was narrow and did not provide a very large target. And they also had stub wings, one on the right side here and the other one on the left side, where they could mount other weapon systems. Of course, being so underpowered with that piston engine, it didn't really matter much because it could barely lift its own weight. Bell was pretty disappointed about losing this contract. However, one of the engineers, a gentleman by the name of Mike Falsey, had an idea. And he was thinking one day about an original aircraft contract versus a modified aircraft contract. The original aircraft contract was a very formal process. They had just been through it. It takes about a year to complete. However, if the manufacturer is already manufacturing an aircraft for one of the services, and they want to modify it, they can modify that aircraft, show it to the service they want to sell it to, and the service can say yay or nay. So Mike's idea was, we have a fabulously performing aircraft in the Huey, and it's already in production. We've built hundreds of them for the Army. Why don't we just build a skinny Huey gunship? And that's what he did. He put pen to paper and he drew out the Huey's tail boom. And here's our old B model Huey gunship again. And so this entire back section is right off the B model Huey. And then they used 80% of the Huey's components. So the engine, transmission, rotor blades, the instruments, the radios, the hydraulic systems, fuel systems, all of that stuff is off the Huey. And then they incorporated some of Bell's 207 ideas and put them all into one package. This is a picture of Mike Falsey and his first original design for the Cobra, AH-1 Cobra helicopter. He showed that to his local bosses, and they all really liked it. And then finally, he showed it to the CEO of Bell Helicopters, and Mr. Duquiette. And Mr. Duquiette just absolutely loved it. So he said, Mike, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you $800,000, and you can handpick your team, and I want you to go build this aircraft. The only caveat is you got to do it in secret because we're kind of doing an in run on these contracts now. So we don't want anybody else to know about it until we've already got a flyable product out there. So that's what he did. Mike went over to Meacham Field there to the west of Fort Worth, Texas. And he rented this hangar, and with his team, in 5 months and 28 days, they built the first, what they called then at the time, the Huey Cobra. And remember that all of that stuff were right out of the Huey. They did not achieve 80%, but they did achieve 70% compatibility with the Huey. First test flight was on August 28, 1965. And Bell also called Cobra the Huey Cobra because they wanted everybody to believe that it was in fact just a G model. Normally a first model of anything is an A model, but they already had the A model through F model Hueys in production or on the drawing board. So this became the G model Huey Cobra. And they kept that name until I think 1971. They finally got rid of the Huey and they just called it a straight Cobra. So this is what the Huey Cobra looked like. You'll notice that there's no skids down here because they had designed them to be retractable. Those did not make it into production. Also, the canopy above the pilots was made out of a bullet-resistant glass, but it was too heavy and way too expensive, so that did not make it into production. They also, back here on the tail boom, they had speed brakes, and that was to keep the Cobra from going too fast when it's in an attack dive. The first time they tried it, it ripped it off the tail boom, so that didn't make it into production either. So as they were test flying this aircraft, they invited a lot of the local military brass out to take a look at it, and they were really impressed. And they told Bell, said, you guys need to take this up and show it to the folks in Washington, D.C. They made arrangements to do that, and this is another iconic picture here, because in the front seat, that's Mike Falsey himself. That's one of the Bell test pilots. So they filled this thing up with fuel, and they flew it to Washington, D.C. with 4 or 5 fuel stops in between. Once they got it out to Washington, they did in fact show it to the bigwigs. They showed it to the Secretary of Defense McNamara and General Westmoreland, and they were really impressed and they really liked it. But they had this problem. They had already awarded a contract to Lockheed. So, what are we going to do? Well, Bell heard them arguing. They said, okay, we're going to sweeten the deal. And if you buy some of these things, we can have them in Vietnam, not just in production, but in Vietnam in 2 years. Well, that teetered the totter, and the Army ended up ordering 110 initially to serve until the Lockheed delivered. So the Cobra was going to be an interim aircraft initially. Spoiler alert here, finally in 1972, the Lockheed was still not ready for production, and the Army finally canceled that contract and increased this number from 110 to multiple hundreds. 2 years, 1 day after the first flight, 1967, the first Cobras arrived in Vietnam. They were assigned to the 334th Assault Helicopter Company, the Playboys, who happened to be stationed at Ben Long at the time. And this is what the enemy sees when a Cobra's coming at you. You can see it's a nice narrow profile, much more difficult to hit than the Hueys. So meanwhile, I'm finishing up flight school and going to Hunter Army Airfield to learn how to fly the Cobra. Once I got to Hunter, I spent 1 week of flying from both the front seat and the back seats. The Army always uses a rated qualified pilot for both positions. The second week, we spent all the time firing rockets and firing the miniguns, which we thought was very appropriate because it is a gunship after all. And we figured we should know how to shoot it and hit what we were aiming at. Then I was off to Vietnam. This is a map of South Vietnam, just to refresh everybody's memory. North Vietnam is up here. That's the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, Laos. When I first flew into Vietnam for my first tour, I landed at Tan Son Nhut Air Base. Spent a couple of days there with doing paperwork and classes for in-country orientations. Then they flew me up to An Khê Air Base, which at the time was the headquarters of the 1st Cavalry Division. And then they further flew me up to a place called LZ Sharon. LZ stands for landing zone. This is a blow-up of the previous map, just showing the north of the I-Corps area. There's the DMZ again. If you were ever in Vietnam or listened to all the news reports back in the day, you may remember Quang Tri, capital city of Hue, Phu Bai, Da Nang, several of the others. LZ Sharon was located right about there. A couple of other names that you may remember from back in the day, and that is Khe Sanh, which was located right about there. This is the combat base of Khe Sanh. It was quite a battle. And then also the Ah Shaw Valley was located right about there. So this was our entire flying area for my first tour. I'm going to show you another location. It's called Utah Beach, which was on the coast just to the east of Quang Tri. I'll talk a little bit more about Utah Beach here in a few minutes. I was assigned 229th Aviation Battalion, 1st Cav Division, Air Mobile, and further assigned to D Company of the 229th. the Smiling Tigers. And we were one company with about 12 to 15 gunships, and we spent all of our time protecting our ground forces, which is exactly what we were supposed to be doing. When I first arrived at LZ Sharon, I was, let me see, dismayed, disappointed. There's some word in there I'm looking for. I was really glad that I enjoyed camping when I was a kid, because that's exactly what we were doing. I don't think there was a solid structure in the whole landing zone. I was even more disappointed when I saw what my living quarters were going to be, and this is exactly what we lived in. GP medium tents, 5 senior NCOs or officers per tent, 10 enlisted per tent, and that's where simply everybody lived. The Cobra parking was in what we called revetments, and they had these 2 walls going down each side, so we could bring the aircraft in and park it there, and then we could fly it out in the morning. And these walls would help protect the aircraft in the event of a mortar attack, which is a fairly regular occurrence. We also used to quip that our Cobras lived a little bit better than we did. Our dining facilities were first class, but seriously, the food was very good. And you can see that we had air-cooled dining facilities. The air could come in this side and go right out the other side. But my favorite was our showers. Yes, we had showers in Vietnam, and this is what they looked like. They had, let me see, cold and cold running water. But I can tell you what, in the heat of Vietnam and all the humidity, it was an absolute delight to get a shower over there. This, of course, was the enlisted shower. Us high-pollutant officers, we had about a 4-foot tarp that went around to hide our boy parts and keep us a little bit modest. Okay, once I got settled in at LZ Sharon, I started joining the rest of my compatriots flying the combat missions, and most of our flying the first month or so was around the Quezon combat base. This is a picture of it, and I showed this picture because I wanted to show what the terrain was like around it. So much of Vietnam is flat and rice paddies. There are very mountainous regions. Mountains went up about 4,000, 4,500 feet. And there were a lot of valleys and ridge lines all over this area. Most of our fighting took place around combat base at Quezon. In fact, this next picture shows the Tet in January through April of '68. I got there in February. So a lot of our missions were around and protecting the combat base itself. And this is not fog, smoke from cooking fires. They had a rocket mortar attack that night, and these are smoking buildings and whatever wood there was to burn. The mortars and the artillery rounds would usually get them. So in addition to flying around Quezon proper, there were a number of hilltop outposts. I know there was at least 7 of them, and this is where the Marines would put in a company of men and some artillery pieces, and they would use these outposts to attack both with the artillery, and they would send out personnel missions to interrupt Charlie's supply and operations in those areas. Our mission, of course, was providing fire support for the ground forces, and it didn't matter one lick to us if they were Marines or Army. We were all soldiers, and we protected each other. Most of the time, we flew in teams, a fire team of 2 Cobras. I say most of the time, I don't remember ever flying single Cobra, with very few exceptions. If there was 3 or 4 Cobras, we called that a heavy fire team. After AH-1 cooled down a little bit, then we were involved in what was called Operation Delaware. And this is the AH-1 Valley, and you can see the valley right here. It was a major supply route from North Vietnam and Laos to resupply the Charlie's forces in South Vietnam. And our forces wanted very badly to interrupt that supply chain because it included personnel also. The purpose of Operation Delaware was to put landing zones all along these mountain tops so the Army could put in, or the Marine Corps, artillery pieces, and they would be able to engage supply trains as they came through the Oshawa Valley. Two divisions involved in Operation Delaware. The 1st Cav Division of what I was assigned to, and this was pretty much our sector for the 1st Cav Division, and then up north was covered by the 101st Airborne, and they had this very similar mission up there of putting in these landing zones so that we could interdict the supply trains. The very first day we went into Operation Delaware, I was in a heavy fire team. My aircraft commander in the back seat, I was flying front seat, was also the air mission commander for all three of us. And as we started to get close to LZ Pepper, we found out that there was a rather severe anti-aircraft battery located right along in here. I can't remember exactly, but it was one of the higher peaks above LZ Pepper. And the bad part was it was one of the big ones. So it was a 37 millimeter anti-aircraft. In World War II, we called those flak guns. We were unable to get even close to LZ Pepper, so we had to find a solution. My aircraft commander said, I'll tell you what, guys, we went over here and we flew around the tops of these mountains, and then he sent 2 of the Cobras up, and he wanted them to orbit up here so that they would be backlit by these clouds, and the anti-aircraft battery could see them. They wouldn't fire that far, but they could see them. And while they did that, we went down low level and flew all the way down around here, which is more dangerous than it looks because there were a lot of people shooting at us. But we found out one thing was that all the shooting at us was falling behind us because the gunners were used to shooting at Hueys, which fly along at 80 to 100 knots. And we're clicking along at 140, 150 knots, and they were not leading us sufficiently. So we were grateful for that. Anyway, we ended up flying around to the backside of this anti-aircraft battery, popping up at the last minute and diving down, and we attacked that battery. My aircraft commander fired 6 or 8 rockets and put all of them right in on top of that gun. I was hosing the whole area down with the minigun, and I probably put 3,000 or 4,000 rounds right on top of them. We got secondary explosions, and then bottom line was we took that anti-aircraft battery out of action. And this is another picture of LZ Pepper before it was even built, and I wanted to show this picture because it shows how thick the jungle and the trees are in this area of Vietnam. They're just everywhere. They're very tall. And of course, there's no place for us to land our Hueys or Chinooks or anything else. So the plan was that we had 5 Hueys with us, and they were equipped with Rangers, Army Rangers, and they had chainsaws along with them. And the Hueys would stop and they would hover over the top of the jungle. This is LZ Pepper here, just from a different angle than before. And the Rangers would rappel down these lines, get down amongst these trees, whip out those chainsaws, and start cutting down the trees. And this was not a new tactic. The Army had to use this in several other locations. So it was a well-rehearsed drill for the Rangers and for our Hueys. And of course, the whole time the Hueys were out there dropping the Rangers in, we were flying circles and orbits above them and firing into the trees around the area to keep Charlie's head down so they wouldn't be able to shoot at our Hueys or our Rangers going down. Finally, they were able to, they had enough trees cut down that we could start bringing in our ground troops with our Hueys, and they set up a base of operations there and established their perimeters. The whole time that was going on, we continued to fire around the perimeter to keep Charlie away from them. And we were there pretty much continuously. So we would take our 3 Cobras and we would fly around and support the ground troops for usually about 45 minutes to an hour until we started to run low of either ammunition or fuel, and usually it was ammunition. And then at about that time, we would have another 3 Cobras coming in. We would break off and go back to our staging area to rearm, refuel. The other Cobras would pick up our mission. So we gave them pretty much daylight to dark support around the landing zones. This is a pretty routine operation. It wasn't just unique for this one operation. In the first week in the AH-1, the pilots were flying 12 to 14 hours a day. And of course, we did not complain because we knew all of our soldiers on the ground out there, they were there 24 hours a day. We did not get out of the aircraft. We hot refueled and we hot rearmed. They would bring us cold water and hot meals while we were rearming and refueling. It was estimated that per day, each one of the Cobras from the 1st Cav Division would fire about 380 rockets and about 48,000 rounds of minigun rounds. We would actually change out the entire minigun because it was completely wore out from the number of rounds that we were putting through them. Just the 1st Cav Division, on the very first day, we lost 10 Hueys, 1 Cobra, and 1 Chinook. Casualties were pretty high for the 4 days that I was involved with AH-1. Once we got the troops, the initial troops on the ground, we would bring in the howitzers. These were 155s and their basic load of ammunition with the CH-54 Sky Cranes. And of course, we escorted them in and out and provided covering fire around them to, again, keep Charlie's head down. Our Chinooks would also come in, but they were too big to land. So they would hook their rear wheels on the backside of a berm and continue to fly. Once the troops were off, we'd evacuate some wounded, fly off, and go back to a secure base somewhere. And like with the Hueys and the Sky Cranes, we protected the Chinooks when they were anywhere near LZ Pepper or any enemy activity. So I told you first initially about Utah Beach, specifically April 23rd, 1968. This was scheduled to be a non-flying day, but I got a call about noontime, and they said they had a situation, and they wanted me to fly one of our 2 Huey gunships. And we had mostly Cobras, but the Cobras at the time were restricted from night flying, so we kept 2 Huey gunships so that we could do night missions. And they wanted me to take a lieutenant and go out and do a surveillance mission. While we were in the middle of that surveillance mission, and during the middle of the surveillance, we did get an emergency call on our radio that 2 dust-off Hueys, dust-off is a medical evacuation Huey, were in trouble near Utah Beach. So we called up our operations center and we said, we want to go. And they said, roger that, go. So we went over, provided gun cover for the dust-offs, and in the process, we tangled with a fairly large Viet Cong, or NVA, or Charlie, as we always call them, force. So the good news was that we made 4 attack runs against Charlie. And they were all 4, well, 3 of them were very successful. And the dust-off was able to evacuate 12 wounded Marines. And then later we found out that the Marine Company commander on the ground, because of the effectiveness of our gun runs, was able to regroup and counterattack the Charlie force, and he gave us credit with saving about 80 of his Marines. Now, the bad news was, on our very last attack run, I had 2 pair of rockets left. Dust-offs were ready to depart. I fired a 1 pair of rockets. I think I fired the 2nd pair of rockets. And the reason I say I think is because at about that time, my hand came off the cyclic where I was flying the Huey and hit me in the front of my helmet. I had been shot in the arm. We set up our gunships always, and whoever was flying the aircraft got shot. The aircraft would return to wings level and would start to climb, so you don't go flying into the jungle. And that's exactly what our aircraft did. It put us heading directly over where the Viet Cong and the NVA regulars were shooting at us from. This is not a good situation. My lieutenant immediately jumped on the flight controls and banked us real hard left to get us out of their point of aim. But some more bad news. We took a total of 32 hits. 27 of them were small caliber and 5 of them were large caliber, 51 caliber to be exact. Our door gunner was killed. Our crew chief was wounded. He had multiple bullet fragments. My lieutenant was shot through both calves. Didn't hit any bones or no major arteries, but he was having difficulty moving his feet. And of course, I was wounded, shot in my right arm, and I also Found out later that I was shot in the right side of my chest, and also I had some shrapnel in my left leg. So our aircraft was in not really good shape. Our hydraulics were out, which made the flight controls very, very stiff. Many of our electrical systems were out. We had electrical fire in the overhead, and the crew chief put that out. Our radios and intercom were out, so we had to yell at each other to communicate. And many of our instruments were out, and most of our warning lights were on. But the engine continued to run, which was a significant event as far as I was concerned. Our flying duties, my lieutenant in the left seat, because he was shot through the legs, he controlled the cyclic and the collective. And since I was shot in the arm, but my legs were okay, I controlled the pedals. This wasn't anything they taught us in flight school. We were just doing the best with what we had left. Our best news was that our Charlotte Fury finally made it into the quandary MASH en route, which took us somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. I noticed, I knew that I'd been shot in the arm, so I was sitting there holding my arm, and I was thinking, well, how bad was I hit? So what I did was I tried to move my hand, and I saw movement. I didn't realize at the time that it was only these two fingers that were moving. The other three would not move at all. But I did notice that as I was holding my arm up, there was a stream of blood that was coming out from my elbow area, which was leaking around. I'd actually been hit on the top of the forearm. When I saw how much blood I was losing, I asked the crew chief to come up to the cockpit, which he did. And I asked him if he knew where the pressure point was for the arm. And he says, well, I think so, sir. And I said, okay, well, try and find it, in my right armpit. And once you find something that is pulsing, then press it up against the bone as hard as you can. And he did that. And the stream of blood went down to a drip of blood. And we later found out that the crew chief saved my life by remembering his, I don't know, Boy Scout or Army basic training. He definitely saved my life, because when I got to the MASH pad, the doctor told me that if I had been another 10 to 15 minutes, I would have bled out, not survived. So that's what happened en route. When we finally saw the quandary MASH pad, we landed. And there's an old story among pilots that any landing that you can walk away from is a good landing. If the aircraft is usable after the landing, then it was a great landing. So by that low metric, we made a good landing. A couple of medics came in and they helped me get out of the cockpit, finally got down to the ground. I looked over at the emergency room and off I went. Then I don't remember anything after that point. I passed out about 20 yards from the door. As soon as I woke up, I found out that I was in the triage room, and I already had an IV with blood going into my left arm. And there was a nurse and a doctor, and they were cutting my flight suit off. And he said, I think that I can save your arm. And then I started thinking about it. In previous wars, if you were shot by a high-speed projectile, it damages the tissue around the point of impact and through the wound channel. And if you don't cut that tissue out, it will putrefy and turn into gangrene. So eventually, they wheeled me into the operating room. When I finally woke up, the doctor said that he worked about an hour on my arm, and that he thinks that he got all the bad tissue out of there. Has the artery is repaired, and he said that my median nerve, which controls all the muscles in your forearm and in your hand, was about 20% damaged. And he told me that he had left my arm unstitched so that they could pull the flap back. Well, I got a picture. I was hit on the top of the forearm up near the elbow. Bullet cut out right here. And then he cut all the skin open so that he could get in there and inspect and cut out all the damaged tissue. And twice a day for a couple of weeks after this, the nurse would come in, open up that flap of skin, sprinkle this white powder in there, and get down and sniff to see if she could smell any gangrene developing. And if she didn't, then re-bandage my arm and do it again in the evening. And you can see just the about half of the scar on my right-hand side. That was evidently a ricochet bullet that hit into my side and broke a rib, but went about 6 inches and stopped. So they were able to cut that out just fine. I spent a total of 5 more days at the MASH, and I was very thankful that I still had a right arm. And that's when I discovered that my thumb and the first 2 fingers, index and middle finger, were non-functioning, and my ring finger and little pinky were doing okay. And that's when I started noticing the nerve pain. It was very, very uncomfortable. So I went from Kong Tree up to Quinyon, where I spent another 12 days, and then they shipped me over to Camp Zoma, Japan, and they declared me infection-free. So they stitched my arm up and sent me to Letterman General Hospital in San Francisco, where I spent a total of 4.5 months. Significant memory I have about Letterman was when I first arrived there, I was assigned to a convalescent ward, and this is there was probably 20 beds on each side. Down at the far end, there was 4 individual rooms for senior NCOs and officers. And then at the near side, there was another 4 rooms there. 2 of them were examining rooms and 2 of them were the nurses' station. So when I first went in there, the nurse put me into one of the examining rooms. The doctor came in, took off my bandage and looked at everything and rebandaged it. And then he left, and then the nurse came back in, and she had this kind of a smirk on her face. And I looked at her, and I thought, what's that about? Well, she led me out of the room, the examining room, and turned me right so that I was looking down this entire ward, and I saw everybody who could stand up and get out of bed or out of chair standing by the foot of their beds at attention on both sides. Even the guys in their wheelchairs, they had their wheelchairs up near the foot of the bed, and they were sitting at attention. And the guys laying in the bed were laying at attention. Someone finally said, "Present arms." And every single one of them saluted. This really caught me by surprise. I looked back at the nurse, and she was openly smiling now. And she said, "Sir, they heard that you were a wounded helicopter pilot, and they wanted to do this." These honorably wounded men did not know me from Adam. All they knew was that I was a helicopter pilot. And they were not saluting me, they were saluting all helicopter pilots. I thought about that for a second, and probably every single one of them had been pulled out of harm's way and into a hospital by a medevac dust-off helicopter. So that was an experience. So we'll live. I will remember for as long as I live. In fact, even today, when I hear the national anthem, instead of putting my hand over my heart, as everybody does, I salute, because as a retired soldier, I'm authorized to do that. And while I'm saluting, I think about that crew chief and doctor that saved my life and my arm. And I also think about these gentlemen at Letterman that paid me such an honor. Okay, for about 4 months, I was involved with pain management for my arm. The nerve pain never got any better. I was taking a lot of medication for the pain, but I had no movement of my fingers either. Then finally, the first week in October of '68, almost 6 months after I'd been shot, I woke up in the morning and I knew that there was something major different. And as I was coming out of my sleep fog, I looked around, and then I noticed that I had no pain in my right hand. And I looked at my hand, and I was able to make the first fist that I was able to make in about 6 months. So Kathy and I were extremely happy with that. I finally went back up to Letterman for a medical evaluation. They cleared me. They said I was about 80% recovered, which was a big thing I was concerned with. From Letterman, I was assigned to Hunter Army Airfield. It's out near Savannah, Georgia. And I spent a 2.5 tour there on the job training as a maintenance officer and as a Cobra test pilot. During that tour also, I received a direct commission for Chief Warrant Officer, First Lieutenant, and then I was promoted to a captain. When I finished my tour at Hunter, they sent me off to Aircraft Maintenance Officer and Test Pilot course, so I became certified to do what I've been doing for the last 2.5 years. After that, back to Vietnam for my second tour. Here's our map of South Vietnam again. Like the first tour, I landed at Ton Son Air Base near Saigon, but this time I went down to the Delta to Vinh Long Army Airfield in the Delta region right next to the Mekong River. The Vinh Long was the home to the Black Hawks, the 7th of the 1st Air Cavalry Squadron. The Black Hawks, being an air cavalry, they had observation air helicopters, they had troop-carrying Huey helicopters, and they had their own organic armed helicopters or attack helicopters, the Cobra. From the Black Hawks, I was assigned to the Light Horse, which was Charlie Troop. It was 3rd of the 17th Air Cav as their maintenance officer. Our living conditions at Vinh Long were a whole lot better than they were up at LZ Sharon. You can see here, these are the hooches that the pilots stayed in along both sides. And then this was a large latrine and shower building. So we had, and we actually had hot running water this time. So that was a big improvement. Our rooms inside the hooches, and these rooms were air conditioned, they had TVs, stereos, a little refrigerator. So it was pretty nice living. The only bad point of these rooms was during the monsoon season, we had to sometimes find alternate modes of transportation to get to our room. And inside the room, of course, it was pretty damp also. This was my roommate, George Anderson, captain. He commanded the Cobras, and he's not missing the left foot. That's how deep the water was in our room for that particular time. Out at the airfield, this was my hangar, or half of the hangar. I had half of it. Alpha Troop had the other half. And these were one of my Hueys, 2 of my Cobras in there being worked on by my mechanics. This was actually my office right up in here, and then my quality control and production control. My NCOs and my other maintenance officers all had their desk up there. Beneath that, we had an engine shop, a prop and rotor shop, hydraulic shop, armament shop, electrical shop, and stuff like that. Our call sign was the Scavengers, the maintenance platoon. This was our patch that we all wore. And our mission was to inspect, repair, and replace components, all of our 30 aircraft, and keep them in flying condition. Another picture of our maintenance hangar. This was from the inside. Our loaches, because our Hueys and our Cobras had 100 flight hour inspection. So after 100 hours, we would bring them into the hangar. We'd open up every panel and every door and make sure there was nothing wearing out or a bullet damage that we had previously not found. We looked them over with a fine-tooth comb to make sure they were airworthy, and then we would pull them back out of the hangar. The loaches had a 300-hour inspection activity, so we almost never had more than 2 loaches and canvas Quonset huts to do the repair in them. So we worked inside. This is one of our Cobras. We could also service and maintain the weapon systems. Sometimes if the hangar was full, we would work on the aircraft outside the hangar. We would spend on an average about 10 maintenance hours per flight hour. So my platoon had plenty of people to do that with. We had about 90 NCOs and technicians, and then I had 3 other maintenance officers that helped me with the maintenance officer duties. The Cobra in the area around when the hangar or when the area around the hangar were full, we would actually repair aircraft out on the ramp or in the revetment. We had plenty of vehicles, so we could take our toolboxes and parts and mechanics down and repair them right there where they parked. And of course, after all of this maintenance is done, then one of us test pilots would get in and we would do a very thorough pre-flight inspection, and then we would take the aircraft out and test fly it around the area. And then, of course, the Cobras being gunships, I always thought the guns were pretty important. So once the test flight was over, I'd come back in. They would load me up with some condemned ammo, but I would test fire all the weapon systems, make sure they all worked. Captain Gary Connell was my Huey maintenance officer. Chief Warrant Officer Dale Berg was my Loach maintenance officer. He handled the entire program by himself. Warrant Officer Doug Jenkins was also Huey test pilot. In addition to our regular maintenance, we also had combat damage, and that was all extra maintenance for us. You can see here where this window was blown out of the door, little pepper marks all over the place. So obviously this aircraft got a little too close to probably an exploding grenade or a mortar round. Of course, anytime anything pierced the outer skin of the aircraft, we had to look inside of it to make sure there wasn't any additional damage. This crew was very lucky that the bullet went squarely through the tail rotor drive shaft, did not come apart as they flew it back. Sometimes we had more combat damage than just bullet holes and shrapnel holes, and this was one of our Loaches that crashed, was shot down, chopped off its tail boom. This is one of our Hueys that crashed, was shot down also. And sometimes the crash was so bad that there was not much left of the aircraft. In my second tour, we lost 5 Loaches, and this is not just battle damage, but they were battle damage to the extent that we could not repair them, and we sent them away to be fixed by higher maintenance. So it was a loss to us. But 5 of those were Loaches, 3 Hueys, and 1 Cobra. 1972, I returned back to the United States, and I was assigned to Yuma Proving Ground, and this is near Yuma, Arizona. Spent 3.5, almost 4 years there. And it was a research and development base. I got involved in the development of new systems for new aircraft, and that was a great tour that I had. I probably was involved in 24 major projects. The 2 that I like to talk about the most was the development of the S model Cobra, which was a 400 horsepower more, larger engine and a larger transmission, so it could carry more stuff, and also the development of the TOW missile system. This was me here hovering out at Castle Dome Heliport. This was an S model Cobra with the TOW missile system. We were in the process of test firing that. And I also worked on the 20 millimeter Vulcan cannon installation. The TOW missile system was a major improvement on the Cobras. A TOW missile is about 39 inches long, almost 7 inches in diameter. And it's what we call a point weapon, which means once it's fired, the gunner in the front seat can look through a sight that's up in the nose, and he can guide that weapon to the target. And it is very, very accurate. So this made the Cobra a tank killer, which was something that was a major advantage for the Cobra. Okay, so let's talk about the museum's Cobra. It is an AH-1E model. This is a picture of it. It's got all the latest electronic upgrades and advancements. You can see here the 19-shot 2.75-inch rockets are old standby. It's a really great weapon. Each one of these rockets, by the way, is equivalent to 105 millimeter howitzer rounds, so they're fairly potent. We also have the TOW missile system launchers on our aircraft, and in the front is a 30 millimeter Vulcan cannon, along with the sights for the TOW missile system. Here's another picture from the other side. Of course, it has the same armament there, but this is a better picture of the 20 millimeter cannon. I think it fires around 1,500, I think, rounds per minute. This is the turret sight, and the gunner in the front seat can look through his sight there, and he's actually looking out through a telescopic sight unit. And he has 2 powers. I think it's 3 and 13 power. So he can acquire a target with the 3 power, switch it over to the 13 power, and guide that TOW missile right in to a point target. The other side of this turret up here has some infrared lasers and rangefinders and stuff for other type of missions. Our aircraft was constructed in 1997 as an S model. It was later upgraded to an E model. 92, it was gifted to the Air and Space Museum by the U.S. Army. And 7 years later, in 99, it was restored by Convair and Air and Space Museum volunteers. Our aircraft is a combat veteran. In 1983, it served in Operation Urge and Fury in Grenada. And in 1989, it was involved in Just Cause down in Panama. So, the bottom line to this whole presentation is the Cobra any good? My opinion is that it was a great aircraft, but I'll let you decide. The total number of Cobras built was over 2,300. These are just the model numbers that were produced over 100 of the aircraft. The G model is what I first started flying, and I helped develop the Q model and the S model at Yuma Proving Ground. Three bottom ones are the Navy and Marine Corps Cobras, and they're all twin engine because when you're out over water, it's a little bit different situation than if you're flying over land. The Cobra is in current service with the United States Marine Corps in the form of the Viper and several other nations. So the Cobra has spent over 55 years in active military service, and it's still counting. The Army, when it turned in its Cobras, was buying the Apache, the AH-1 attack helicopter. And one thing that I wanted you to notice was that you notice the overall shape of the aircraft is about the same in both instances. If you get something that works really, really well, you just keep right on doing it. The Cobra has been utilized by this following list of countries. In Vietnam, in the 8 years that it served there, 831 Cobras served in Vietnam. We lost 308 aircraft and we lost 255 Cobra pilots. These numbers may seem pretty high, but when you compare them with the Loach and the Huey, there's actually lower numbers. So the Cobra was actually safer to fly than the Huey or the Loach. All those 831 Cobras flew over 1 million combat hours, flight hours. Definition of combat flight hours for the Army is when you go from weapons hot to weapons cold. Okay, the Cobra has also served in combat. We know about Grenada, Panama, and Vietnam, in the Persian Gulf War, Afghanistan, and Iraq. So that's my story about the Cobra and its development and its utilization, a little bit about Army aviation, a little bit about Vietnam. If you do have a question, I will respond if you'll send me an email to doatman@sdasm.org. With that, I would like to thank you very much for paying attention and listening to the presentation, and I hope you have a very safe and healthy day. And thank you again for paying attention to it.